The auctioneer was still on the previous parcel when Boyd Kavanaugh started laughing, not at anything that had been said. Just laughing, the way some men laugh when they already know the punchline. Open-throated, turned slightly toward the men beside him, as if inviting them to share it. The parcel was 64 acres in the north end of Breck County. The county listing described it as low-lying wetland, seasonally inundated, assessed at minimal agricultural value. The opening bid had been set at $380 based on back taxes owed by the previous estate. There had been no competing bids in the 3 years the county had tried to move it, which was why it was sitting in a tax forfeiture auction on a Tuesday morning in Dunbar, Mississippi, in a room that smelled like old carpet and the particular exhaustion of county government. Laine Greer was sitting in the third row with $395 in an envelope on her knee. She was 29 years old and she had driven 4 hours from Biloxi to be here, and she was not going to look at Boyd Kavanaugh. She kept her eyes on the auctioneer. She kept her hands flat on the envelope. Kavanaugh said something to the man beside him. She couldn't hear the words, only her name, the way sound sharpens in a room when someone says a word you're listening for. Then one of the other men said, loud enough to carry, 64 acres of swamp. Lord. And Kavanaugh laughed again, satisfied, the laugh of a man who has already written the ending. She bid her $380. When the gavel came down, Kavanaugh stopped laughing. He watched her walk to the clerk's table with the particular quiet of a man who has made his point and is now waiting to be proven right. The clerk, an older man with reading glasses, pushed up on his forehead, processed the receipt without comment. Then he looked at her over the counter. You know what you're buying, he said. It was not quite a question. I do, Laine said. He handed her the receipt. She folded it and put it in her jacket pocket, and she walked out into the flat gray morning, and she did not look back at Boyd Kavanaugh, who was still sitting in his chair, watching her go. If you've ever watched someone make a decision that looked completely unreasonable from the outside, and quietly wondered whether they saw something everyone else had missed, stay right here, because this story is going to mean something to you. If you're new to Western Stone Creek, hit subscribe and turn on your notifications. We tell stories here about people who do hard things on difficult ground, and we don't let them go easy. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this one travels. Now let's go back to that courthouse. Let's go back to that envelope and that laugh, because the laugh is where this story begins. Laine's mother, Laine Greer, had died 11 weeks earlier of a stroke in the back bedroom of a rental house in Biloxi. She was 57 years old. She had worked hotel laundry, canning lines, a shrimp processing plant, and for the last 6 years a grocery cashier on the south side of town. She had rented her whole life. She left behind $400 in a savings account, a storage unit with 2 months prepaid, and a daughter who had been sleeping on a borrowed couch since the landlord reclaimed the rental house 3 weeks after the funeral. Laine had not been sentimental about the house. She had spent enough of her life moving between rented places not to confuse the address with the home. What she had been was tired of moving, of borrowing, of watching her mother work herself to nothing and have nothing to show for it at the end. The $380 was everything in the savings account, minus the cost of getting to Dunbar and eating for 2 days. She had learned about the auction through her mother's cousin, a woman named Bertrice, who still lived in Breck County, and occasionally sent Laine messages about nothing and sometimes about things that mattered. The message had said, "County's selling off parcels. Most of it's garbage, but there's one up north you might want to look at. Swampland. Nobody wants it. Opening bids low." Laine had looked up the parcel on the county website from her phone in the break room of the shrimp plant at 10 o'clock at night. 64 acres. 40 of it classified as palustrine wetland, bayou adjacent, freshwater, choked with water hyacinth and arrowhead, and the kind of dense aquatic overgrowth that makes land look like nothing and keeps everyone away. The other 24 acres were elevated scrub, the kind of ground that floods once a year and grows back into brush the rest of the time. The last owner had stopped paying taxes on it when his estate went into probate, and nobody in the family wanted to take on the liability. She sat in that break room for a long time. She was thinking about crawfish. This is the part that requires explanation, because it sounds either very smart or very stupid, depending on how much you know about Mississippi wetlands, and most people don't know much. Her uncle, her mother's brother, had been a crawfish farmer, not the cultivated kind, not someone who stocks ponds and runs pump systems and feeds pellets. He had farmed natural bayou, the old way, which meant he understood the difference between a piece of wetland that looked dead and a piece that was suppressed. He had taken Laine out on his flat-bottom skiff every summer from the time she was 8 until she was 16, and he had taught her to read water the way other people's uncles taught them to read a baseball field. He had told her once, while pulling a trap from a duckweed-covered slough that looked like it hadn't been touched in 40 years, that crawfish don't need you. They need the right water, the right vegetation cycle, and to be left alone. You can suppress a natural crawfish population for decades with the wrong plants or the wrong management, and you can bring it back by clearing the overgrowth and restoring the flood cycle. You don't stock them. You don't feed them. You just stop doing what was wrong and let the water remember what it was. He had died 8 years ago. Laine had not forgotten what he told her. She had not forgotten it when she got on the highway at 4 in the morning to drive to Dunbar. She had not forgotten it when she sat in that courthouse room and listened to Boyd Kavanaugh laugh at the idea of someone spending money on land everyone had agreed was worthless. The first night, she slept in her car. She had pulled off the parish road as close to the property as she could get, which was not very close. The fence line, what remained of it, ran along a ditch overgrown with elephant ear plants 6 feet high, and beyond that the land was a wall of water hyacinth so dense it had the quality of solid ground until you stepped on it. There was a smell, not unpleasant, but green and heavy, the smell of water that has been standing in vegetation for a long time. She sat in the car and ate a gas station sandwich and looked at what she had bought, and she thought about what her uncle would have said. He would have said, "Look at the birds." She did. Even in the last of the evening light, she could see them, red-winged blackbirds working the hyacinth edges, a great egret standing motionless at the far margin, and along one particular line running northeast through the vegetation, a congregation of wood ducks, not random, not scattered, but following a line as straight as if someone had drawn it beneath the surface. She noted that. She didn't know what it meant yet, but she noted it. Hollis Tatum answered the door in work clothes at 7:30 in the morning, which told her he had not retired from doing things even if he had retired from having anyone to do them for. He was probably 72, lean in the way of men who have spent their lives doing physical work, with hands that looked like they had been used hard and maintained carefully. Bertrice had given her his name. Old man, Route 12. Knows every inch of the North Bayou going back 60 years. Doesn't talk much to people he doesn't know. Good luck. He looked at her. He looked at the truck. He looked at the strip of cloth wrapped around her right hand, which she had put there because she had spent the previous afternoon pushing through the hyacinth to find the property's interior, and had cut her palm on a submerged piece of rusted fence wire. "You're the woman who bought the Delacroix tract," he said. "Yes, sir. 64 acres of nothing. That's what people are saying." He was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. His kitchen was the kitchen of a man who lived alone, but had not given up on the habit of keeping things in order. There was a single coffee cup on the counter. He got a second one without asking whether she wanted any. She told him everything: the crawfish, her uncle, the water hyacinth, what she thought might be underneath it if the flood cycle could be restored. She told him about the wood ducks following that line. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he turned his coffee cup around in his hands twice. "That line the ducks are following," he said. "Yes. That's the old Delacroix Canal." She went still. "Hand dug," he said. 1880s, maybe earlier. The original family built a system of channels connecting the back acreage to the main bayou. 6 channels total, the longest maybe a quarter mile. They managed it as a natural fishery. Crawfish, catfish, bream. Fed the whole family and half the people in this end of the parish for 2 generations. He paused. Then the grandson inherited it and didn't want the work. And after 40 years of no maintenance, the hyacinth took the channels over completely. Now you can't see them from the surface. But they're there. Earthwork doesn't disappear. It just gets covered. Laine sat with that for a moment. The ducks know, she said. The ducks know, he agreed. Open water under the surface vegetation. Different temperature, different current. Wood ducks find it. She thought about what intact canals would mean. Restored channels connecting her interior acreage to the main bayou would restore the natural flood cycle. And if her uncle had been right, if the crawfish population was suppressed rather than gone, then what was sitting under 40 years of hyacinth was not a worthless swamp. It was a working natural fishery that had been waiting. Have you seen it? She said. The canal system. Hollis looked at his coffee. Something moved across his face. Not quite grief, but related to it. My father helped dig the extension on the South Channel, he said. 1951. I was 6 years old and he let me carry the rope. He stopped. I haven't been in that water in 30 years. The clearing work took everything she had. She bought a flat-bottom skiff from a man in Natchez for $200 borrowed from Bertrice against future repayment, and she spent the first 3 weeks working the hyacinth with a long-handled cultivator and her hands, filling the skiff with cut vegetation and hauling it to the elevated scrub ground on the property's edge. Water hyacinth cuts easily. It also grows back at a rate that is almost insulting. She cut it anyway. She came back the next morning and cut it again. Hollis came out on the 4th day without being asked. He pulled up in his truck at 7 in the morning with a second cultivator in the bed and waded in beside her, and they worked the surface in a silence that was more productive than most conversations she'd had in months. He was the one who found the first channel. They were working the northeast section when his cultivator struck something that rang. Not metal, but compacted earth, the particular resistance of intentional ground. He stopped. He looked down into the dark water. Then he reached in. Here, he said. She came alongside him and reached down. Her hands found the edge of it, a raised earthen berm, 18 inches wide, following a line east-northeast under 2 feet of water. Not collapsed, not eroded into nothing. Intact, held together by the root systems of cypress trees that had grown along it in the intervening decades, their roots reinforcing what human hands had built. She stood in that water for a moment, with both hands on the canal wall. Not triumph. Something closer to confirmation. The particular feeling of having believed something was there and finding out you were right, which is different from relief because it does not come with surprise. It's solid, she said. It's solid, Hollis said. He stood with his hand on the berm, looking northeast along the line of the channel toward the main bayou, looking past what was there and seeing what had been there and what could be there again. She recognized the look because she had been wearing it herself for weeks. She found all 6 channels over the following 3 weeks. The ducks helped. Not intentionally, they simply went where the water was best and followed the channels the way they always had, and Laine followed the ducks. When you paid attention to what the land was already telling you, it was not complicated. Most people did not pay attention. They looked at the surface and made their decision and walked away, and that was their right. And it was also the reason that 64 acres of canal-threaded natural fishery had sold for $380 at a county tax auction with no competing bids. A woman named Orvis Blaine ran a crawfish distribution operation 3 parishes over. Bertrice had given her the name. Orvis came out on a cold November morning and walked the cleared channels and said nothing for a long time. She was somewhere in her 60s, compact and deliberate, with the manner of someone who has seen enough good ideas fail that she had stopped predicting outcomes and started just looking at evidence. You finding crawfish sign? Orvis said. Burrow activity along the east bank of the main channel, Laine said. Trails in the mud. I haven't set traps yet. Set traps, Orvis said. Let me know what you pull. She set traps that afternoon. She pulled them the next morning. The crawfish were there, not in volume yet, not with only 2 channels cleared, but they were there, native and wild, needing no feed, living in the system they had always lived in, waiting for the system to come back. She sent photographs to Orvis. Orvis called back within 20 minutes. How fast can you clear the rest? She said. The man from Memphis came in January. His name was Truett Palom, and he had driven down in a vehicle that cost more than the land she had bought. He was pleasant in the way of men who have learned that pleasantness is more efficient than aggression, that people give more when they do not feel threatened, that the moment to reveal what you actually want is after the other person has begun to feel comfortable. He sat across from her under the tarpaulin she had set up near the main channel and told her he had an interest in developing the acreage behind her property. 200 acres of landlocked wetland that currently had no viable water access. Without a connection to the main bayou, it could not be permitted for any water-dependent use. Her canal system, once restored, would provide that connection. He named a number, $95,000 for the canal corridor and a permanent easement. It was more money than she had seen in any single context in her entire life. She felt it land on her with the physical weight of something that changes the shape of your options, that makes everything you have and everything you still need to build suddenly feel negotiable. She looked at him steadily. "What's the back acreage worth to your project?" she said. He shifted slightly. "Not much, just enough to tell her something." "That's a complex assessment," he said. "Give me a range," she said. What she already knew, because she had spent 2 weeks at the parish courthouse pulling survey records, talking with the extension agent, calling the State Coastal Commission, was that 200 acres of permitted wetland with bayou access, managed as an eco-resort or natural fishery operation, was worth somewhere between $1 and $2 million, depending on permits and timeline. She also knew that her canal was the only viable access point, that alternative routes were prohibitively expensive on 3 sides, and that Palom had been sitting on that back acreage for 18 months, waiting for exactly this situation. She had spoken to a lawyer in Jackson named Francis Aldecoa, who Hollis had found through an old contact and who had agreed to look at the case because, as she had put it, the situation was genuinely interesting. Francis had told her what she had was a strong negotiating position for an easement, not a sale, and that she should not confuse the two. "I'm not selling the corridor, Mr. Palom," she said. "If you want to discuss a properly valued easement agreement, I'm willing to have that conversation. My attorney would need to be part of it." He looked at her with an expression that was recalculating. "You have an attorney," he said. "I have an attorney," she said. He left with the promise to be in touch. She watched his vehicle go down the parish road, and then she called Hollis. "He came," she said. "I heard he was in the parish," Hollis said. "What did he want?" "The canal corridor, full purchase." "What did you say?" "No." A pause. "Good," he said, "that was all." The spring floods came in March, and they came hard. 4 inches of rain in 3 days, then 2 more on top of that, and the Breck Parish drainage system, built for a different century's weather, backed up in the low sections of the north end and spread across road shoulders and filled the low fields along the main bayou with 18 inches of brown standing water. Her land absorbed it. That was the function of natural wetland that no one mentioned in county planning meetings until it was already too late. It absorbed. The 64 acres acted as a sponge, taking on water that would otherwise have backed up into the neighboring properties, moving it through the restored canal system into the main bayou in a slow-managed drain that kept the surrounding fields from going completely under. Boyd Kavanaugh's cattle farm was 3/4 of a mile north. His low pastures held water for 5 days. His high pastures stayed dry because her wetland had taken the overflow. He came to her fence on a Thursday morning. He was a big man in his 50s, with the permanent outdoor squint of someone who has spent a life in the field, and he stood at the property line with his hands in his jacket pockets and looked at what she had built. The cleared channels, the working path along the main canal, the egrets working the shallower sections. "Your channels are draining north," he said. "Yes," she said. "The main bayou connection is running at full capacity. The system is working the way it was designed to work." He was quiet for a moment. "My low pasture held," he said. "Stayed under, but didn't lose topsoil. 2 years ago, same rainfall, I lost 6 inches off that section." He looked at the canal. "You're managing the drainage." "I'm managing the channels," she said. "The drainage is what natural wetlands do when you let them." Kavanaugh looked at the wood ducks moving along the far channel, the same ducks that had led her to what was hidden here. He had laughed at her in that courthouse. He had not been quiet about it. He did not apologize. She had not expected him to. Men like Kavanaugh did not arrive at apology directly. They arrived at it sideways, over time, through the slow accumulation of evidence that they had been wrong, and what they offered instead of the word was something more durable, a change in how they treated you. My wife's family has been running cattle on this road for 80 years, he said. We always managed the low pasture ourselves. Never worked the way we wanted it to. He stopped. I don't know what an arrangement would look like, but if your water management has bearing on my low pasture going forward, I'd like to understand what you're doing and whether there's something worth talking about. She looked at him for a moment. Come back Saturday, she said. I'll walk you through the channel system. He came back Saturday. He brought his son, a quiet young man in his mid-20s who asked careful questions and listened to the answers. They walked the cleared channels for 2 hours. Before he left, Kavanaugh put his hand out. She shook it. The crawfish season that year was the best yield Orvis Blaine said she had seen from a natural fishery operation in 15 years. Not because Laine had done anything extraordinary, because she had cleared the channels, restored the flood cycle, and stopped doing what was wrong and let the water remember what it was. Which was exactly what her uncle had told her on a flat-bottomed skiff when she was 12 years old, and which she had not forgotten. The catfish came on their own. Native channel cats that had been reproducing in the back sections for 4 decades, suppressed but not gone, moved into the cleared channels once the water ran right again. She had not planned for catfish. The land had added them. The easement agreement with Truett Palom finalized in May. Frances Aldecoa had gotten her $16,000 annually, indexed to inflation, renewable at 5-year intervals, with a provision that any development on the back acreage required a hydrological impact review that Laine had the right to commission if she believed the project threatened her water system. It was not everything. It was solid, and it did not require her to sell a foot of ground she had bought. She called Hollis from the parish road on the drive back from Frances's office. It's signed, she said. Good, he said. Come by tomorrow, he said, after a pause. I made a pot of something. What kind of something? The kind that's done, he said, which was exactly the answer she had expected from him. Hollis came out to the property on a Sunday in June, not to work, just to walk. She met him at the fence line, and they walked the cleared channels together, the careful pace she had learned to set when he was with her. The pace of a man whose body had begun to argue with him, but who had not yet agreed to the terms. The canal was open now, all 6 channels, the water moving slow and clear in the June light, the banks held by cypress roots and native sedge that had returned in the clearing's wake. Wood ducks nested in the snag trees along the east bank. A great blue heron had claimed the junction of the 2 south channels as its personal territory and regarded all visitors with the dignified contempt of something that had been here considerably longer than anyone else. Hollis stopped at the junction of the main channel and the first side cut. He put his hand on the berm wall, the same earthen bank his father had helped build in 1951, the same wall she had found by feel in the dark water, with her palms on a cold October morning. He stood there for a long moment. She waited. She had learned to wait out his silences, which were the working kind, not the empty kind. My father would have liked to see this, he said finally, not entirely to her, or not only to her, more to the air, to the water, to whatever part of the past was still present in a place that carried this much of it. She did not say anything for a moment, because there was nothing to say that would not diminish it. Tell me about him, she said. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might redirect. It was his primary defensive maneuver. She had learned to recognize the small shift in posture that preceded it. He didn't redirect. He was a waterman, Hollis said. Knew this bayou the way some people know a house they've lived in their whole lives. Every room, every sound, and what each sound meant. He paused. He used to say the water has a memory. You can make it forget for a while, but you can't make it stop remembering. It always goes back to what it was, if you let it. She looked at the water, moving through the channel his father had dug. I think he was right, she said. Yeah, Hollis said quietly. I've been coming around to that. The parish assessor's office sent a revised assessment in August. She opened it standing at the edge of the main channel, still in her waders, mud on her gloves. The assessed value per acre had been revised to $890, based on documented water resources, established agricultural production history, and the restored, historic canal infrastructure. The assessor's office had noted it formally as a heritage structure, which had its own implications for permitting and long-term protection. She did the math in her head. 64 acres at $890 per acre. She had paid $380. She stood there with the letter in her muddy gloves and let the number sit for a moment without doing anything about it. A wood duck crossed the channel low and fast, angling toward the east bank. Somewhere in the back section, a catfish was doing what catfish do in a system that has been restored to what it was meant to be. She thought about her mother, not the grief of her, which had become something she carried, rather than something she was lost inside. She thought about her mother's hands, in hot water for most of 60 years, and about the look on her mother's face when she talked about the land her own mother had grown up on. Not sentiment, just the look of someone describing something true that had been lost and had never been replaced. She had not bought this land for her mother. She had bought it because it was the only thing she could afford that had any chance of being worth something, and because she had one piece of knowledge that gave her a reason to believe the chance was real. But standing here, with the restored water moving through restored channels in a system that had been working before she was born, she thought her mother would have understood it. Not the crawfish or the easement or the number on the assessment letter. The part underneath all of that, which was simpler and older, and the only part that actually mattered. She had stopped doing what was wrong and let the water remember what it was. That was the whole story, when you stripped it down to what it was. She pulled off her gloves and walked back up the bank to where her truck was parked, and she had work to do, and she went and did it.